Alright, what's up guys, Azura here, and today we're here for our monthly end of month tier list. And this time, as you can see, the layout of my tier list has changed quite a bit. After seeing a Japanese YouTuber's tier list layout, more specifically Bosuo, I'm sure some of you have seen it, for the very notorious last tier that I chose to change a bit myself. His tier was named What the Fuck Is This? I think that was what brought a lot of attention to people who've seen it. But yeah, so his tier list basically was 5 tiers. Although he did list it as tier like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Realistically speaking, all the decks he had were all basically tier 2 and above decks. So I just changed out the layout a little bit, but by doing it like this, I clear out all like the clutter, like the decks I didn't think were very good to begin with. I just kind of had on the list. So like all the tier 3 stuff, like you see here, like Messiah's gone, Sharheart's gone. I think Aquaforce was on here. That deck's gone. So all the decks that I don't think were like that particularly good, they're just off the list. And doing it like this, it gives you a better view of how I actually think about the decks. Split between those tiers. Like sometimes my tier 2 is like huge and there's no way to actually split it. With this, I get rid of the tier 3 and I can like more accurately split the tier 2. So I think this is a little better as for a more accurate representation of how I feel about each deck in their respective tiers. So tier 1 split between two tiers at the top. So like the tippy tops, the really good decks, and the competitive decks, like decks that are still tier 1 but are like a little worse than the decks up here. So like that. And then tier 2, there's a playable. So this was basically the old tier 2, like the tier 2 of all the decks I thought were like just like baseline playable strong deck, no glaring issues or anything, just a very like good solid deck. Rogue for me are decks that are very like niche matchups, like decks that are very specifically good for targeting like 1 or 2 decks specifically, and has issues are I think pretty descriptive decks that I think have issues in the current meta. So but because everything here is still tier 2 better, I think every deck here is still like baseline a playable deck you could take the ladder and be perfectly fine with. So yeah, so without further, like you can see here, like all these decks are like pretty solid, whatever, like pretty solid decks that pretty common on ladder. You could play on ladder and not feel too bad about it. So yeah, so we'll start from the bottom. So the decks that I personally feel like have issues right now in the current meta are Gurgit, Blade Master, Chronojet, and not you, Vanquisher. I think if I were to change the order, I think I'd do it something like this probably. I think Jet is probably the weakest deck out of this pile here. So like you see these decks here and you go, wow, Blade Master was rated like tier 1 like a few months ago, right? So I think the issue with Blade Master right now isn't itself being I think the deck is still overall pretty solid, but it's just in context of the current meta. I think what Blade Master is doing is not good at all whatsoever. So if you look at like the old last month's tier 1, I put Altmile, Asha, Luard. I think Blade Master was all 3 decks quite hard. Altmile will Unga Bunga you to death. Asha has resist every single turn, and Luard damage choking you is not exactly a fun time either. So I think just in the context of the current meta, I don't think Blade Master is doing a whole lot. And then even against the decks that are the decks that aren't those decks, I don't think Blade Master does particularly well against those decks either. So just because of that, I think Blade Master has definitely fallen from grace quite a bit. I think the deck just it doesn't do what the meta wants you to be doing right now. So because of that, Blade Master is here. And to a similar vein, Vanquisher is the same thing. Again, like another 3 attack retire heavy deck. So Vanquisher is just worse Blade Master in like pretty much every way. So if Blade Master is here, obviously Vanquisher will be here. The only reason I left Vanquisher on the list here is because it still has the niche of dealing specifically with Asha and Lure to some degree. So you could make arguments for it being up in Rogue, but I think the deck overall just isn't very good. Like I think even against those 2 decks that it's supposed to counter, it doesn't have like this like super easy, basically guaranteed win kind of matchup. So because of that, I'll leave it down into the has issues. I think this deck definitely has issues. It's just not a very good deck, period. So because of that, that's why it's here. If this deck didn't have like the niche of being able to somewhat deal with Asha and Lure, I think I'd kick this deck off the list completely. So yeah. So next up, Gurgit. The reason why I have Gurgit here is because Gurgit again is a very overall solid deck. I don't think there's any like glaring issues with it. But I think that is the issue with the deck. It doesn't have any glaring issues. It is very well rounded. It does a little bit of everything. It pluses relatively well. It has okay push power, has okay defensive issues. But I think that's exactly the issue with the deck, is because the deck is a jack of all trades and master of none. It just kind of half-asses a little bit of everything. Your push is not nearly as good as Altmiles. Your kill turn is not nearly as good as Altmiles. Just an example, because they're both paladin decks. Obviously, there's other common decks you could compare it to. But like I think comparing alt is very fair. Just because of that. Like your push, your aggro is like strictly worse than alt in almost every single way. You pushing from 4 with glorious rating is like the most like nerve-wracking shit in the world, because if they hit like a defensive, your 2 of your columns might not hit. So there's those issues. Defensively speaking, again, decks like Asha, decks like Luar, they can definitely play more defensively than you. And then plussing does pretty okay. Like you just record outside your deck, it's cool, but that also leads to the issue of decking out. You know, this deck does not have a built-in way to recycle stuff. Like Altmile recycles its 2s, Asha can recycle everything, Luar can recycle everything, etc., etc. So just because of that, like this deck just does a little bit of everything, but doesn't do anything well at all, and then it just kind of falls over against the actual good decks, and deck out is still a very glaring issue with this deck. So that's why I have it here. And Jet, very similarly in that vein, except it's a little better defensively, just because of the the piles of Great One intercepts you can put out every turn if you really want to. So Jet and Gurgit both have very similar issues. They're pretty okay defensively, but they both run the risk of deck out, as well as not having very like mediocre offensive pressure. Jet specifically, I think, has even worse offensive pressure than Gurgit. Again, this is also a deck that can heavily emphasizes removal as a way to push with Chronos Command Revolution. So and if decks are already getting rid of their own board, yeah. So there's quite the issues there with that. So yeah, so Jet kind of just not it. Like Jet does have the niche of dealing with Neo Nectar very well, so I guess there's that. But other than that, Jet also falls on the issue of very low offensive pressure, very prone to deck out, and has okay defense going for it. So yeah, so that's the bottom of the tier 2 for me. So for Rogue tier, I think this tier is basically just reserved just for Chaos. Chaos as a deck can be very annoying for some decks. Some decks have a very hard time dealing with it. But at the same time, decks that can deal with it just tell Chaos to go kick rocks, basically. So yeah, so Chaos. I don't know how I'd say. Like the deck itself, I think is very mediocre. I don't think this deck is particularly better than these decks, other than the fact that it gets to play with the very fair mechanic of Lock. But because Lock is a very fair and balanced mechanic, it can just shut down some matchups very easily. So that's why I'll put it in Rogue tier. I think like decks like Altmile can definitely struggle against this if like the locks start getting out of hand. So yeah, so because of reasons like that, I'll put Chaos in Rogue and higher than these decks. But no other decks go here. I don't think any other deck has like this like Rogue potential of like having this like super niche thing that it does that can potentially screw some decks over. So yeah, so tier 2 Rogue, just Chaos. And then as for playable, I will put Fenrir, Prisms, Night Rose, and Shushu. Shushu here just because it's a new deck, so I will rate it. But I think the order is probably something like this. Probably. It's probably something like this. So Shushu, this is the new deck, so I'll go over this first. I call this deck Shushu, but realistically it's just good stuff fish. The actual Shushu cards are terrible. And the actual Shushu deck, that Shushu deck that's actually good is playing like the grade 1 that searches the grade 3, and the Stride. That's really all you're playing. The rest of it is just like Roan, Duo PGs, Quancies, Manyas for a big booster, and then a bunch of Spikas. Like I can hardly call this a Shushu deck, but it is the new best like good stuff fish decks. Like basically how like Prisms are like the good archetype fish deck back in the day. Like duos were like that good archetype fish decks, and then you have like the archetype fish deck, and then you have the good stuff deck like the Mir Victoria kind of thing. So Shushu is basically like the equivalent to that. It's like the good stuff deck. I think it is probably worse than Prisms, but this deck just does okay things. I think Lapria is a pretty good Stride too. So yeah, pretty okay deck. Nothing too particularly special. Just good fish cards do good fish things. This fish has a very high quality card pool, mainly the dual cards. That's very splashable. So just because of that, this deck is pretty nice just because of that. So yeah, obviously we only Stride for free. It's pretty good too. CC with the grade 1, pretty nice. So yeah, just all those things together make this a very solid deck. And next up we have Night Rose. So the reason I have Night Rose here is, honestly speaking, because Night Rose just does not do anything better than the other decks. So as you can see here, there's 4 decks left off. So obviously Hari is also a new deck that obviously is above, that is in tier 1 somewhere. in my opinion at least, that is above Night Rose. But yeah, Night Rose just doesn't do anything better than the other, than like Hari or Altmile. Like, doesn't push better, kill turn is not better, getting your pieces isn't particularly easier, probably easier than Hari, but definitely not easier than Altmile. So because of all those things, I don't think Night Rose, like with the addition of new, like the new GRs don't really help the deck too much. Like Dragoot can deal with background stuff, which is pretty cool. Rose can call a board and crit, which is like nice, I guess. But your kill turns are still the same. Songer is pretty good though. Songer lets you scale for big numbers, can hit Jingle 3 because it doesn't have to swing at van. And the new Night Rose does make it so you can actually go into a strat that pushes instead of going for Obadiah, so that definitely fixes a very glaring issue with the deck that I had before. Because of that, it definitely just brought it up from like the pits of down here where I would have put it last month. But yeah, nothing too particularly special about this deck in my opinion. So very playable deck. I personally haven't played it myself because I don't have the. I'm still missing a few cards. But from what I've seen from the deck, what it does, it's not doing anything too particularly special, nor is it doing anything particularly different from what it was doing before. So yeah, I think playable is a very good spot for it. Next up, we have Prisms. This is JP's, like the deck that JP has a big boner for. Personally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of this deck. I think I made my opinion of this deck very abundantly clear that I don't think it's that particularly good, but I will rank it as a very high, like tier 2 playable deck, because I do think the deck isn't like bad by any means. I just don't think it's anything particularly special. That I just don't see like the rave behind this deck and how IGP rates it like tier 1 and stuff like that. But yeah, the deck's very playable. Very good CC engine. And I think just because of that, has a very strong Luard matchup because of that. I don't think particularly wins that matchup either. I think it's a very even-ish matchup overall. But yeah, this deck is just very solid. Very good CC engine, pretty good drawing engine, and pretty good kill turn too. So yeah, it's very solid deck. Nothing else to say about it in my opinion. Just very solid deck. Does good, again, fish deck does good fish things. And finally, we have Fenrir. I think this is the deck that my pins raised the most by. So this deck is a very degenerate OTK deck. You get your Taros and Soul. You empty your deck out to a point where it's like 2 cards, and you do your cool little Unga Bunga OTK turn thing. Basically, from 3 against double intercept, you get 3 PG checks, I think, off of pretty big rears and ban. So that's pretty good there. Definitely a very scary deck against a pilot knows what it's doing. Against that knows what they are doing with this deck, and because of that, I think it's a very good tier 2 playable deck. I cannot rate this, in my opinion, I cannot rate it any higher just because I think this deck does have consistency issues. If you've seen the list, this list looks nothing like a conventional deck. This deck is playing main right on heal. It's like 7 grade zeros and a non-existent amount of draws. Like usually like 2 at most. So just because of that, this deck is like very inconsistent to some degree. But at the same time, on your first ride, as long as you can get the Fenrir ride, get 2 Taros and Soul, and draw into your pieces, you're probably asking for 3 PGs from 3. And that itself is obviously very powerful. And for that reason, I will leave it up here. But again, like inconsistency issues, definitely there. If you don't get your Taros and Soul, you can't do combo. If you like draw all your Taros or damage all your Taros, you're not in for a very fun game. If you draw your Taros, or you can like sandbag a turn and like Dream of Dragon as far as back and hope you get them again next turn. But because this deck is running no heal guards, your rate of survival is very low because you have to draw your 4 PGs to survive. So yeah, it's a very playable deck, but it has, like, realistically speaking, with the way I talk about it, you would think I put it here, but I think the ceiling of this deck is just so high that it counteracts the slight inconsistency issues that it has. So because of that, I will put Fenrir in a very playable tier 2 deck. And finally, for tier 1, so obviously I think these 3 decks obviously belong up here. I rated this deck as the best deck last month, and my opinion of these has not changed at all whatsoever. I think these are still probably the best decks. And just a new Hari here. I think I will put it up in top. So I just have nothing here in this. I think all 4 of these decks are very competitive. Or very like tippy top kind of thing. I don't think there's like a deck here that's like worse than the other decks. So we'll go over the old ones first. So Altmile is Altmile. I don't think it's well to go about. Unga Bunga, hit face Unga Bunga, call grade 2s, always have your pieces. Good deck, good Unga Bunga deck does good things. So Alt Mile, this ape deck that just high rolls your face in. Go second, win game. The Alt Mile is like the face of go second, win game. So there's that. Luard. This is specifically the damage choke variant of the list. The version deck that I personally love playing. Definitely the deck I enjoy the most right now. But that's neither here nor there. Personal bias aside, I do think the damage choke version of this list is like really, really good. I think it is beyond degenerate of what it's doing in the game. And despite me liking it so much, I really do want them to do something about this. This is like not fun for the opponent sitting across from you playing against this deck, like at all whatsoever. And this deck chokes you at 3. Eventually, they're like blowing up your back row every single turn if they want to go into Ogma. At some point, they reach a crit stack and they just go drag driver, crit, crit, crit. Oh, PG, cool. Next turn, I'll do it again. Wall up with giant 18k intercepts, and eventually you'll run out of guards and you'll die to them. And they will never deck out because Luard puts 2 back at the start of every turn, and Drag Driver can also put 2 back with its own skill. So this deck will basically never deck out, and you will eventually die to giant crit Vanguard. And so yeah, this deck is doing very degenerate things, but because degenerate things are usually really good, this deck is very powerful. Asha also doing quite the degenerate things. Just feels a little slow. I think Asha within its like top tier friends here, I think Asha like probably does the worst against its fellow top tier baits here. But against all of these other decks, I think Asha is kind of like stomps on them, to be honest. Fenrir a little less so, but I think Asha is kind of like dicks on like every deck down here, honestly speaking. So because of that, Asha is this deck that just like it just kind of raffles some of these bad decks, like Jingle Thuria, very degenerate. Primavera with like the Bloom Gray one, Audette now. Gigantic fuck big numbers that go burr at face. At 5, 3 PGs or you're dead. If Gladiolus, you're even more dead. So, yeah, Asha, very, very good deck. It's still a good deck. Still doing very degenerate things. Thuria is a good card. What else can I say? But yeah, again, like I said earlier, I think Asha does struggle a little bit against the other decks in Tier 1. I don't think Asha has a particularly good matchup against either Altmal, Hari, or Luard here. But I think Altmal has a very good matchup against everything down here minus Fenrir. I think Fenrir can be a pretty rough matchup too, just because of the nature of what the deck is doing. So yeah, Asha still definitely a Tier 1 contender, even though it does struggle a little bit against the other decks. And finally we have Hari. Hari is yet another Unga Bunga deck. It just go face, hit face, giant numbers, go burr. First stride, push the 5 second stride, you're dead. This deck has an even higher kill ceiling than Altmile. If we're strictly rating the decks based on how hard they can kill you, I think Hari takes the cake as the deck that kills you the hardest in this game. But Hari does, in my opinion, have some pretty glaring issues. So I definitely have thought about putting Hari down here instead. But after a little bit more thinking, I think Hari does belong with the rest of these decks. I will put it down here for now because it is the first month this deck's been out, so I will not jump to any conclusions. I think it's a very solid Tier 1 deck. I definitely think it is a Tier 1 deck. I just don't know where I would rate it exactly. But I've played like a whole season with this deck basically. During the second half, during Fenrir season, this was the deck that I clowned with for like the first half of the season basically because it was very fast. But yeah, this deck has is another go second win game deck. Your first turn, your stride like is basically guaranteed push to 5 because your numbers are huge, and then on second stride, the Hari second stride, since you have 3 Haris face up now, all your modules you get +9, so your numbers are like gigantic, fuck big, on second stride, and with how the deck extends, you are getting way more checks than Altmile could, all for giant numbers that all hit over 6 heals and stuff. So very, very powerful deck. The glaring issue with this deck is that against other combo decks, this deck just like dies if it goes first because the deck doesn't exactly. You can play the starter that can let you like bounce PGs and stuff. You soul charge and stuff. That's pretty cute. But like, go first against these combo decks. You go first. They first stride you. They push you to like 4, maybe even 5. Maybe you like heal down back to 4 or something, and then you push them to 5. Oh, whoops! No intercepts. You're dead now. So. Against the other combo decks, I think this deck just kind of like folds going first. But going second, this deck's very, very powerful. Go second against other combo decks, you'll probably roll them faster than they will roll you unless they heal a bunch. So yeah. Because of that, but like despite it only being one issue, I think that one issue is very, very glaring. I think Alt Mile takes advantage of that the hardest because Alt Mile also slams stuff down early. Also slams stuff down very early to aggro, and because they're intercepts, they are blocking, soaking up damage as well. Luard, Damage Lure can also just chuck intercepts out early if they want to, just to mitigate damage. So that's pretty annoying too. Asha, low less so because Asha like needs to hold his pieces and stuff. Prisms check out stuff really fast. Fenrir low less so because that's a whole stuff, but because you have no intercepts, you're dying even harder to Fenrir if they get to go second. So yeah, more issues there. So yeah, just a few matchups. I even think Hard loses the Night Rose going first in that matchup. So yeah, because of that, I will rate it as the lowest deck. And yes, I do think this is ordered. This is my like straight up opinion of how I think how good each deck is. I think Alt Mile is the best deck right now. Like despite the deck having like slight inconsistencies with guards and stuff, this deck like even going first, you might just still get your face rolled in a lot of the time. Luard, very solid deck. Asha, very solid deck, and then other hero deck. So yeah, so that's it for this month's tier list. These are my thoughts for the meta. Tell me what you guys think about this format. I personally think this format is better than my old one. So tell me guys if you actually like this format or not. I personally think it's better, but if you guys want me to go back to the old one, I go back to the old one and talk about these garbage tier 3 decks I give zero shits about. So yeah, so that's it for this month's tier list. Like and subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.